Eleanor Dartnall is the Principal and Senior Financial Advisor of Focus Wealth Advisors, which has recently rebranded from Dartnall Advisors. Eleanor has had 40 years' experience in the finance and banking industry and now focuses on teaching her clients and working together with them to achieve their goals, which has earned her many industry awards, including the prestigious AFA Advisor of the Year Award in 2014. We look forward to hearing from Eleanor today to present her research on understandable advice for all Australians. Please welcome Eleanor.
What you want, baby, I got it. What you need, do you know I got it? All I'm asking is for a little respect.
Thank you. I still haven't got that music about me. I don't know what the connection is. It's still good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an advisor, like most of the people in the room. Have a relatively small practice with 3 senior advisors. And I'm struggling with all of the things that we've had Phil take us through this morning, just as many of you are. But what I want to talk about today is the DNA of advice, or what I think the DNA of advice is. I was given a task by a part of the Leaders Forum of the AFA, and I was given a task, along with the leaders in each state, to go away, get a group of advisors around me, and come back to them after we'd sat down and decided what the SOA should look like. As I far too often do in my life, I said, I'm not doing that. I don't want to sit down as an advisor and say what it should look like. I want to ask clients what it should look like. Does that make sense? They're the people that have to read it. And what I wanted to find out was, do they understand it? Do they understand that whole onboarding journey, or do they come in with their needs and as a result, a few weeks later, they get a statement of advice, which by and large they don't understand. It's such a weighty document that most of us put an executive summary on the front and then say sign here. So the goal in this research that I'm still doing, you're seeing fairly raw data, because I was only asked to do this about 6 weeks ago. So you can imagine that not much work's been done in my office until I've had this prepared. But what I'm aiming for is understandable advice for all Australians, including that 80% of investing Australians that don't seek advice. Because if we can find out why they don't, look at the market that opens up. That isn't the reason I'm doing this, but hopefully it might be an outcome. So how did I get to talk to people who aren't my clients? Because that wouldn't have been very relevant. I needed to talk to investors who have received advice or sought advice, and it needed to be since FOFA, and it needed to be pretty recently so that they could vividly remember their onboarding journey. I didn't want to ask questions and they said, well, don't really remember. So where did I find them? I run a series of investment workshops in various areas. Every year I run 4 2-hour series in a workshop. And fortunately, I was able to find my participants in those audiences. The front end was very difficult because you can imagine I had to do this with the permission of their advisors. If there are any of those advisors in this room, I can't thank you enough. You're obviously fantastic advisors that want to get some answers yourselves, and I appreciate it. I don't know who they are, but I think it's across about 20 advisors, and the cohorts, there is about 71 of them, and you can see the age groups. So I had to come up with, first of all, I made the mistake of doing this as quantitative research, and I asked out of 1 to 10, how did you feel about the different steps in onboarding? It told me nothing. I don't know what they meant by saying 8. What did that mean? You didn't understand it, or it was too quick, or it was okay? So I had to start again and sit down and ask them questions that would confined only to that onboarding journey. I don't know how much money any of these people have got. I don't know what the strategies are. That isn't what I'm trying to get at. So, overwhelmingly, this was the response. 90% of the respondents said they trust their advisor and therefore the advice, which is an interesting way to put it. So here it is, building a relationship, and therefore based on a fantastic relationship, in some cases an assumption, therefore the advice is right. And we'll come back to that later. So my first thing I wanted to find out was how prepared were these participants for that first meeting. Obviously, they all suddenly had a need to find advice for an objective they had. They're planning to retire. They've got something urgent that's happened. Somebody in the family needs aged care. They've inherited. There's a lot of reasons that trigger that phone call to an advisor after they've looked you up on the website or been referred or whatever. And I wanted to know how prepared they were in that first meeting, or whether all that preparation happened in the first meeting. 9% didn't prepare but had an idea of what they wanted as an outcome. 60% needed help to plan for the future and felt prepared to have a really meaningful discussion. This cohort wanted very comprehensive advice, right out to, they know they're going to retire in 15 years. Maybe after that they mightn't be very well, and how are we going to pay for that? Very comprehensive. Interestingly, investment trends, who do a lot of research, their latest research has come out just in the last month or so. And around this, Australians who prefer comprehensive advice face-to-face, right now over the thousands that they access for their research, is only 8%. However, Australians who are willing to transition to face-to-face comprehensive advice later, 77%. Interestingly, 31% of the people I spoke to had a clearly defined need just for some limited advice, specific to one goal. But they received comprehensive advice. It confused them, they felt it would be out of date, and they just didn't get exactly what they wanted. Interestingly, investment trends, Australians who prefer their advice piece by piece, 30%. I was a bit encouraged that my research isn't too far off track. Just some takeouts. You know, you can imagine I've got notebooks filled with all of these conversations, and I've got to try and drag out some takeouts. Obviously, there's 71 of them, but what I've done with these takeouts is to find one that represents what another number of these participants said. I didn't know what to prepare. If I had, I think I would have had a better outcome. I expected to have an initial chat so that I could see whether I could work with the advisor, and you can read the rest. Now, very few of you, I don't recognise an awful lot of faces, but those I do know that this is my soapbox. How many people in this enormous room of people read your clients' wills at this point or at any time? So I can count the hands. Next time, if I'm still around and not on a walking frame, I would like to see every hand go up. Why is this so important? You're going to give advice to a client. You're going to give advice to them how to invest their money. You're good advisors, and you might be suggesting that having it in joint names might be more effective than in your own name. It might be better to have it in a trust because you've got a specific reason, or you're going to contribute it to super. If it's currently in your client's own name, you have just taken that wealth out of their estate. And if you read their will, you might see that they've specifically made provision for that money to be given to someone for a specific reason. You've just overturned their estate planning wishes. We can't go the next step without doing this. And also, you'll find that if you do this in your first meeting, that your relationship with your client changes dramatically. Does that make sense to any of you? Nobody's even nodding. Is this thing on? 34% stated the will provisions were not discussed. However, the advisor did ask whether there was a will. Of course we do. What is it, page 2 of the FPQ? Have you got a current will? Tick. Client, is it valid? Don't know about that because you haven't read it. And I can tell you the client doesn't know. The only person that knows everything about the client when it comes to succession planning is you. You get to know their family. You get to know their family issues. You know what money they've got and how it's invested. You should be checking it. 52% stated that their will was current but didn't provide a copy and were not asked to do so. 14% stated their advisor has a copy, and look at this statistic and you think what this statistic would be if 100% had given their advisor a will and they'd read it. Of that 14%, 15% of those who provided a copy, it was found the will needed updating to be valid. You think about that. My will was never discussed, and I've remarried, and I don't know whether I should have a new will. So here's a client with an advisor with a new client who is going to die intestate. We should be reading them. This is the biggie. Do you all love using your risk profiling tool? This is challenging here. I don't know whether you all use it or not, I can't tell. So I wanted to know whether the client likes it. I was sitting, I don't know, where am I on level 2? We're on level 1 last night, John and I having dinner. It was very crowded in that huge smorgasbordy sort of place, so they put us round in a corner. And sitting next to us was a couple of people having dinner, and they're talking, and we could hear everything they're saying. They're this close. And they were talking about how dreadful financial advisors are. And it was so bad that in the end I said, "Excuse me, but can we join in this discussion? I am one." So it turned out that there was one woman there and one there, and the one sitting next to me turned out to be extremely wealthy. And she went to an advisor. And what triggered her and made her walk away? When it came to the risk profiling, she was handed a piece of paper that was laminated with the investment profiles on it and was asked to pick one. This is our biggest area, I think, that needs to change. It's a tool we've all got. It's a requirement for you to use it. But at some point, we need to represent our clients and say this doesn't work. What's the first question? It's so long since I've used one that I can't quite remember it, but it's something around how long would you stay in the market if it fell 20% or whatever. How can anybody answer that if they don't know what makes the market fall? You haven't taught them. So they tick a box. Then you add up all the A's and B's and C's, I think. Then you divide it by something. And then you tell them what their investment profile is, and they just agree. So we'll come back to that. 27% didn't understand some of the questions, so just picked one of the choices and thought the profile met their goals. Now, I should state here that these cohorts, these participants that I had, were almost without exception people with a postgraduate or an undergraduate degree, even the young ones. 18% understood the questions with some coaching from the advisor and were happy with the investment outcome. It's okay. 36% didn't understand the process or the outcome, but saw that the advisor needed a guide. And 19% said that the advisor completed it for them. This is something we have to have. It's a form we've got to have to be compliant. This is where you sign. I remember I learnt a lot when I went through this with my advisor, and the result was I'm a growth advisor. Fantastic advisor using it as a coaching tool. So my prompting question from this was, what do you know what a growth advisor is? No, I've got no idea. But I've got some percentages in the different asset classes. All of us at some point, probably in the first meeting when we're talking to a client that comes in with objectives and we start to understand how much money they've got, in the back of our heads we're sort of starting to think about strategies, aren't we? You might then have a strategy-specific strategy meeting. That varied between these participants, but I wanted to know whether they readily understood the technical aspects of the strategies that were discussed that were about to be recommended in their statement of advice. Because I want to see whether these people really are participating in the journey of getting advice or whether it's just thrust on them at the end. 39% didn't understand the technical aspects of the advice or some of the language used. 29% stated there was no opportunity to request a broader explanation, so they just accepted it. 40% felt unfit because of a lack of knowledge to participate in the decision making, and the further prompting questions, it's around this space and this time in the onboarding that they had the feeling that they're handing it over and they're losing control. A lot of the language was beyond me. I didn't know enough to ask questions. I would have loved to have asked more explanation, but was too embarrassed. And these are the sorts of reasons why that 80% of investing Australians don't come to us for advice. So importantly, having had all of those sorts of answers, I wanted to delve a bit deeper and find out what their level of communication with their advisor was and why they really felt they couldn't ask questions. I mean, this is somebody they've found out in the very first meeting they like. That's usually when that relationship's formed. I do like you. I'm going to accept the proposal when you send it to me. So what was the communication really like? 60% felt comfortable asking questions, and they didn't always understand the answers, but they had a comfort zone that they could ask the questions. Still, even despite the fact that these people have good relationships with their advisors, still too embarrassed to ask questions. And were very surprised at how ignorant they were. When they went to that first meeting, they thought they had a pretty good understanding. 17% left the advice to their advisor and gave consent without question. I would actually hope that that would be a 0 result. I tried to keep up with so much new information but found it a bit hard. I did ask questions because it was all new to me, but I didn't always understand the questions. So here they are, this is about communication. Then why didn't you ask the question again and try and have it answered a different way so you could understand it? Of course, one of the things this particular statistic showing me is a lack of somebody being able to read the client's body language, because it's usually pretty obvious if they're not understanding what you're saying. So, who are the advisors that I can actually see? I can't see you right up the back. Who's an advisor who's near me? Am I talking to no advisors? Am I in the wrong room altogether? How many advisors are in the room? Thank you. How many pages are your SOAs? Who? 8. Okay, well you can go. No, you can't go. You've got another better speaker after me. How many are yours? Okay, 80. And around Australia, it's 80, it's 100, it's 90. And of course we stick an executive summary on the front. Who's going to wade through that many pages where you have to dig for the information that's about you, the client, which is so wrapped up and smothered in a whole lot of other stuff. I want to know whether they read the whole document and whether they understood it, and where there was content that they didn't understand. So this is the bit that I disliked intensely in the onboarding process. I used to dread these meetings because it used to take me 3 hours because I didn't do an executive summary. I wanted them to understand it all. 24% didn't read the whole document. They relied on the executive summary. Then why are we doing all the rest? 27% of the SOA was partly presented by the advisor, but it was recommended that their client read it later. 12% of those have never got round to it. And 28% were uncomfortable asking questions. They were also confused by the data in so many tables. And it's the answer to this question that I heard the word fear so much. Up front, we put the data, we put their financial data. We then reposition that in about, 7, 8, 9 different tables. And it worries them that you've done that. Why have you had to do that? What have I missed? Interestingly, Investment Trends, that latest research, of those Australians who stopped using a financial advisor in the past 12 months, 22% of them was due to the advisor's poor communication. No, I've not read the whole document. There's too much I don't understand, but I have read the summary. I didn't understand all the tables. There were so many, it was confusing. Does this touch a nerve with anyone? Because we need to do something with it. I haven't got to that point yet. All I've done is found out what the data is. Very importantly is, can our clients give us informed consent, or are they consenting because we've just said what we've just recommended will reach your goals? Did they understand it fully? Can they give you informed consent? Because that's what we should all be getting. 24% that didn't read the whole document gave consent based on the forecasts and the executive summary. 33% believe they understood the recommendations and outcomes well enough to agree to the advice. 43% had faith in the advisor and agreed to the advice based on the advisor stating that if you agree to these recommendations, you're going to reach your goals. I don't think I'll know enough to make the decisions. We agreed to those that were made. I'm still learning. I think I would have agreed to the recommendations because I was told they would help me reach my goals and so on. Okay, so this is important. So are we seeing clients who actually are in control during this onboarding process, whether it's 1, 3, 4, 5 meetings? Because I would think that's important. The clear impression I got was they were releasing control because of lack of knowledge. 21% didn't wish to take control. They said, that's why I pay my advisor. And we see a lot of those. And they'll probably start getting very interested later when they've retired and they've got more time, and then they're going to want to teach you. They want you to teach them. 22% felt that with more knowledge, they would have been in control. But 57% had the strong belief that the advisor took control. That's a high percentage. And the brief time I've had with these people, they didn't look like people who just hand their decision making to someone else. Looking back, I think I should have taken control, but felt a bit ignorant. I didn't realise how little I knew about investing. I would like to think I will take control when I retire. Talking to my advisor, I realise how little I know, so I'm teaching myself. Then I will feel I understand the recommendations better, and then I will be in control. So there's a desire to be in control. And would you like to have been more involved than you were in that whole onboarding process? And importantly, if we think about the Royal Commission and the fact there's more of it to roll out, I would think at some time as advisors, we're all going to turn around and look at one another and say, at what point isn't the client a bit responsible? Well, how can they be? We haven't given them enough information to take up that responsibility. So overwhelmingly the answer was 40% would have preferred to be in control of the decision making, but recognised that they needed more knowledge to offer an opinion or to ask meaningful questions, with the overwhelming takeout being that it's my money, so I would like the decisions to be mine. "26% thought that they, the client, should be responsible because they've agreed to the advice. 29% thought the decisions were left to the advisor, therefore the advisor's responsible. And 45% clearly felt that the advisor was responsible, as that they'd given the advice on what was in the best interest of the client. I would hope that my journey with my client, and this is something I've only come to in the last few years, is a joint, shared responsibility. So when we have a first meeting with a client, they're given a red notebook with embossing on the front that says, this is your money, your journey, it's a shared responsibility. Ask questions, take notes. I'm paying my advisor to make the decision, so I would think he is responsible. I wouldn't like that said to me in the Royal Commission. Okay. So remember I said 90% of these people really love their advisor, they consider him a friend, they probably go out with them, and they think the advice is right. And yet, I asked how many of them refer clients to their advisor as a result of this fantastic relationship. I don't think that percentage reflects that they're necessarily very happy with that process. Only 11% have ever referred a client to their advisor. And when I asked them that prompting question of why have you not done that, you just don't want your friends to know that you've got an advisor. No, because I'd be a bit worried if a friend of mine asked how their money should be managed and don't understand the advice given. It was around that lack of understanding. I didn't want to be embarrassed by a friend coming back and say, well, I have no idea what that advisor just told me. Okay, so I don't know whether Phil is in the room. So Phil asked me to do this. So I had to pull these slides together and go through all my notebooks and find out how many people said similar things so I could give you these percentages. Obviously there's more work to do. But I did all of this and I thought, okay, well, I've done it. I can go back to work for a week before all this starts. And he looked at me and he did that. He said, so what? Well, what he was getting at was, what has it done for my business? to realise that this is the situation that we've got. And I will talk about what it's done for my business, but it's more about what is it about for all of us. And if we look at that, what it's about for us is what I said before, that we need to make the difference. We need to push change up and not have it all pushed down on us. Stand up, represent our clients, and go back and say the tools we've got don't work. The result of the tools we've been given is that the decision making is now in our hands, not in our clients' hands. And when I realised that, I realised I needed to do something in my business. Many of you probably do it way better than I do. But for me, I realised that the journey of misunderstanding started with this. A client answering those questions, patently not understanding the results, and on that premise, I'm telling them what to do with their precious money that they've put on the table. So I knew my role absolutely had to change. I had to educate my clients up front, so I had to throw everything I know out the window and say, how do I do this? How do I find out what their knowledge gaps are so that I can fill them? My ongoing role then is a coach. So I just want to take you very briefly through that path, just to see if it helps. By the way, this is a reminder. I don't know how many of you have had an audit recently, but that's how I felt about mine when I just had it. It was pretty good. It's not easy. Got a whole new range of things they're focusing on at the moment. We're still struggling with learning about them and getting our head around them. But I've actually put that up there to remind me to say, I'm about to give you some tools that we use. You need to make sure that your compliance regime will be happy with you using them. So I've done those hard yards with my licensee, who have been wonderful. At first, because it's so different, they were worried about the auditors coming in and saying, what on earth are you doing that? You can't do that. That's a C, or you've lost all your stars, or whatever it is. And I said, well, I have to do this because this is what's right for the client and it's demonstrable. I actually had an auditor in my office on sabbatical for a week. And then the lawyers came after that, and they agree that this delivers into the client's hands. Does it take way longer than what I used to do? No, it actually takes less time. So we have 4 meetings, sometimes 5 in our onboarding process. I'll preface this by saying that when somebody rings in because they've been referred, or they've read about us, or they've watched our website, and they ring up saying they want a meeting, I will take that call, or I'll call them back if I wasn't available. I will pre-vet that, pre-qualify that inbound call to make sure we've got a service that will make them happy and will deliver. So we don't just blindly make appointments, because we don't offer all of the services. So somebody might want us to look at investing by borrowing or having life insurance. Well, that isn't our space of expertise, so we'll find another solution for them. With the result that our first meeting is with a prospect that, in all probability, we're going to have an ongoing relationship with. Our conversion from prospect to client is 100%. So this isn't a waste of time. So in this first meeting, this is about, as it is for all of you, getting to know this person as an individual, getting to know what it is they want to achieve when they come to us, and almost the only notes I would take in this meeting would be what their goals are specifically. For the rest, I'm just getting to know them. And importantly, so up until this point in the meeting, this is an exchange of whether we're qualified to do it for them and me assessing whether we can achieve what their goals are. But that relationship changes dramatically when we start talking about how do you want this precious wealth to pass on to the next generation. You get immediate change in body language and conversation. Now they're telling you things about themselves and their family that they wouldn't have told you. This is when the relationship becomes deep. They get a letter before they come welcoming them to their first interview, telling them what to bring with them. And one of the things they're asked to bring with them is a copy of their will. If I've got time, I'm going to touch on that later with a case study. So the next meeting, obviously, is our risk profiling. So what on earth do we do? Because I have only ever twice used the risk profiling tool. The second time I put it aside and said, I can never do that again. But you can't just say that, you've got to come up with a solution. So we've written, and you've got a black and white, pretty ordinary looking sample of our risk profiling workbook on your tables. That is printed up as a glossy, very brightly coloured book. And we take our clients through that. It takes about an hour, it might take longer. We teach them about the asset classes, we teach them about risk. We teach them about investing and speculating. We teach them about the different ways you can do it, whether it's direct or through an ETF or a managed fund. We show them what happened in the GFC. We do all of those things so that at the end of this time, without fail, these people with some experience or none, so I had no idea, I would understand it, or that I could feel that I'm going to take control. And the thing there's comment when they leave our front door at the end of this meeting is, I have to tell someone about this. So you know that you've hit the spot. So they absolutely get. There's a hole in the platform here. Just a minute while I extricate myself. They absolutely get it and they understand it. So, what do we do? Do they just sign something saying they've been through the book? That's our risk tolerance tool. That's it, 1 page. They take it home with them. They have to write up in the right-hand corner how much money they're going to have invested. Whether we're going to manage all of that money or not is irrelevant. Some of it they're going to hold in their own name. We might only be investing some of it. But the whole amount goes up the top, and based on what they've learnt and filling in that important cash and fixed income peace of mind part of the pie chart, they fill that amount in first. So we'll come back and they sign it and date it. Compliance is very happy with that. The client, based on what they've learnt, and it's demonstrable because compliance knows the book we've taken them through, the client signs a file note that says they've been right through it with us, and they sign this. So the next meeting is about starting to construct their portfolio with them, because I have a great deal of problem with somebody spending all their lives working hard and bringing their retirement money to me, and I say, right, we'll come back next week because I'm going to tell you how I'm investing your money. I have trouble doing that. So the client comes in and they do it with me. Now, we don't choose specific companies on the stock exchange, although most clients do have an opinion about that and desires are obviously included. But we're talking about the market sectors they might want to be exposed to or not exposed to. We talk about companies, we talk about how a company operates, and they understand all of this. So they're starting to put the bones of their own portfolio together. And at this point, they have their decision about how we're going to do it, whether it's direct equities or ETFs or managed funds, because we've taught them about those as well. And now at this point, we're starting to cement what strategies and what alternatives we're going to be talking about, because I don't want them appearing for the first time in front of them in a statement of advice. So they take away from this, and you've got a black and white copy of this. The next problem for me was this dreadful SOA document. So I unbundled it. Now, I did this about 3 years ago. All of the material that's in an SOA that's compliant, that isn't relevant to a specific client, is taken out of it and put in this separate book. All our disclaimers, there's a glossary of terms, there's an agreement in the guide what their responsibilities are and what our responsibilities are. And they have to read that before they come back to have the SOA read through. Is this making sense? So the next meeting is to go through the SOA. What was a 3-hour meeting is now 15 or 20 minutes. We don't need the executive summary. If there's a lot of strategies and it's complex, that's useful just to walk them through what they're going to read. It's almost an index. So this is about delivering their statement of advice and answering any questions they've got. But it's not very many pages, and they've already had this journey with us. Because the most important thing in this meeting is that acid test of getting informed consent. So let's go back to this. So I've got a client, she's happy for me to use her figures, it's obviously not her writing. The amount she was investing was $765,000. So she went away after her risk tolerance meeting with me, took away her pie chart, and when she came back to that next meeting, and that's when they bring it back, that's how she'd filled it in. For peace of mind, she wanted $200,000 in cash and fixed income. The reason she's got a relatively small amount in property is because she's got a great deal of property already in her own name, and once that's downsized, she'll put that back into other asset classes. $515,000 in shares. So that's okay, but knowing I was going to come and do this, I thought, well, maybe this is flawed. So just in recent weeks, I've gone through with clients as we've been doing their ROAs, the other risk tolerance that is more commonly used to see whether this is flawed. So if we look at Mary, going through that risk profiling tool that you're all familiar with, she came up as a growth investor. What do we do when we say that? We say, well, these are the benchmarks. The first problem is we tell them what the benchmarks are in percentage terms. Well, I don't know how many of your clients can quickly in their brains convert that to dollars that they own. So they agree. So we turned that into dollars, and she was really surprised. She said, oh, is that what it means? Now, this is a secondary school teacher. So I overlaid that with what she did on her pie chart. They're not the same thing, are they? What the client would choose based on quite a lot of knowledge, and she's got a lot now because she's been around for quite a while, and what it is in dollars that the risk profiling tool, the benchmarks, would indicate. So we've done that with quite a few more clients with exactly the same result, regardless of whether they've got millions or a small amount. This huge drift away from their personal choice. So I don't know which is fatally flawed. I think client's personal choice might be okay. Does that make sense? So very quickly, obviously we've practiced this. I thought a lot of people who have been interested have said, well, instead of having them in, can't we just do it on YouTube? What about Google Hangout, and what about we send it out in the mail? Well, you're losing an enormous potential relationship building process. And also I can't see their body language. I don't know if they wanted to ask questions. I don't know whether they've even understood any of it. So I found after all of those trials that face-to-face worked. And unbundling the SOA resulted in a much better buy-in from the client. Phil wanted me, the other so what from Phil was what so what has it done to your business? Historically, I have not been good at getting client referrals. My licensee had problems with it, they were a bit concerned about it and wondered if I needed some special training to get referrals. It's not within my makeup to say to someone, I've done a good job for you if you've got someone else that you'd like to, I can't do that. And it was purely coincidental for me that going down this path of trying to put the decision making back in the client's hands resulted in what you can see there. The 2 years later, it was 84%. It has stayed above 80%, and this year just past, it was 94%. Because these are clients with total buy-in, total ownership, and what triggers that desire to tell someone? And we can absolutely pinpoint it. It's after that risk tolerance meeting, and they say, I have to tell someone. So we know it's hit a nerve, we know it's meeting a client need. And I just want to stop. If I've got time, I can't see the time cards anywhere. But I've got time. I want to finish on something that was a bit of an epiphany for me. I'm a bit ashamed to tell you that I had to even realise I wasn't doing it. Clients come to us for advice, and at some point in that first meeting, they tell us that they've got an amount of money that they want us to consider. And I realised that I wasn't stopping the meeting right there and saying, tell me about the DNA of that money. Where did it come from? What did it take for you to even have it to invest? And we all know it comes from so many sources with so many emotions. Is it because you've been made redundant? In which case we've probably got somebody sitting in front of us who feels as though they've failed, they're ashamed, and they're frightened. It's come from a broken relationship. So they're angry, and they haven't got very much left because they've only got their share. There's all sorts of emotions that we've got to think about. One couple who came with a very small amount of money, who were ashamed, who just received advice, 120 pages of it, with 15 tables. This is a couple who are cleaners. They understood none of it. So they came for a second opinion. And they said they felt ashamed because they have so little. And I asked them, I said, well, tell me about your journey. What have you done? So they had a little business doing cleaning with an income of $70,000. $70,000 between two people. And they had 4 sons. So I asked more questions. They're 54, 4 sons through private school, a beautiful 5-acre property which is in immaculate condition, and they have no debt. They didn't need to feel ashamed. So we've got to find out the DNA of money. You know, it comes from life insurance because of a traumatic event. Ricky, a client of ours, 28, he's a champion snowboarder. They came for advice with what he got from his life insurance, which was sitting in his MLC super fund. It's got to last him the rest of his life, and he's 28, he is today a tetraplegic. You imagine what comes with that and how we've got to handle it and deal with it. So it's about respecting where the money comes from, okay? And very rarely it comes from winning lotto. And you'll find that when you do stop a meeting and you say, I really want to understand the journey. Another client, just the last one, this is fairly recent, a client who came in, she's roughly my age, her father's already died, her mother passed away at Christmas time, and she had a considerable amount. She's got no children herself, second marriage, stepson. And so she just came in, a specific amount, it's sitting in a fixed term deposit, and she wanted me to give her advice about investing it. And I said, well, tell me, it's an inheritance. So that's okay. But I said, tell me what your parents did for them to leave you and your sister such an amazing amount of money. And when you ask your clients about it, and when it's an inheritance, make sure you've got tissues on your table, because it nearly always comes with tears. So she told me her parents' journey. They came from Poland. They came from Poland just after the war. He'd been tortured in Auschwitz. They managed to come back together again with 2 little girls, came from Poland out to Australia, and they had the clothes they stood up in. That's it. Went into the camps that they had here at the time. Those parents held down 3 jobs a day each to put together somewhere where they could be as a family united. Both these women, who are the children about my age, suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, passed down from, quite often, the families of the Holocaust. You think about the emotion that's come with this money and how precious it is and how careful I need to be. So that comes back to reading your client's will. Because obviously my next question was, how do you want to pass it on to the next generation of your parents, lineal family? And she's very clear about that. I don't have children. What I've put together with my husband will go to his son, but this money needs to go to my parents' grandchildren, her nieces. So that's okay, we'll make sure that happens. So did I ask her if she's got a will? Yes, she said she's got a will. She'd only just had it done because she wanted this new arrangement, this money to go down to lineal family. I didn't tick the box and say you've got a current valid will. I said, would you please bring it in, I want to read it. $880 worth of will, it was 1 page. It appoints her husband, and the first clause makes that provision that she wanted. It said, the gift from my mother, held in fixed deposit number X, is to pass to my 2 named nieces, and the residue goes to my husband or his son. How many of you know that that's wrong and that's not going to happen? That gift is never going to happen. It's a fixed term deposit that matures in 2 months. If that gift doesn't exist, it fails. And as an advisor, I'm utterly responsible for that. Does that make sense? Good. Thank you very much for listening. That's it.